Okay, this is Joy Gritton, and I'm here today interviewing Don Johnson from Haldeman, Kentucky. Today is February 15th, 2013, and we're talking about the history of the Haldeman community. And Don, I'm going to ask you if you can start us off by telling us a little bit about your family, your parents' names, your brothers and sisters, kind of who your family is.
I had 5 brothers. Fortunately, Mom had all boys, and that wasn't good for her. It was good for us. We grew up as 2 families. There were 3 of us that were up into high school, and before the last 2 came along, and that made it difficult on everybody. But no, we had a wonderful family. I had parents I wouldn't trade the world for. We had great family, and we stick together yet, even as today. Mom and Dad has passed on, but the 5 boys are still living, and we're just as close together as we were back when we were in school. I've had a wonderful time, great family, great experience. Wouldn't trade it for nothing.
And what are their names? What are your parents' names?
My dad's name was Hallie Johnson, but he was known throughout the brickyard as Red Johnson. He had red hair, and they just called him Red like most people. But Hallie Johnson was his name, and my mother's name was Bertlie Johnson. She was Bertlie Rice, a daughter of Jim Rice. Jim Rice lived here in Moorhead. I think they came from Floyd County to this area back when, before the brickyard. He worked as a foreman on the road department for years and years and years. And he run several times in for county offices, but I don't know just what they did with that. But no, we had a great family, and all of my brothers. I've got one down here with me now in Haldeman, and I've still got 3 that's up north in northwest Indiana.
And their names?
The 2 that's down here is one of them is Ellis Johnson. He's next to me. He's the next youngest. And the 3 that's up north is Otto Johnson. That was our first 3. He's the oldest. And then we got Gary Johnson and James Johnson. And Gary Johnson is in the process. As we speak today, they're clearing ground. He's going to be moving back and building a house right up by me. And he's going to be moving into that this summer sometime. So, and the other brother, he's probably going to stay put where he's at. He's got a big farm in Madurayville, Indiana. He's got like 100 and some acre farm up there, and I don't see him giving that up and coming back. But we're still a tight family, very tight.
And was your father's family originally from right around Haldeman, or did they move in from somewhere?
My dad, his father, they came out of Floyd County also, I think. And, I don't know exactly what his father did for a living, but we have pictures of them there at the house and hung in the bedroom. And, they were back when. It was just, I don't know. I can't remember. I probably never met any of them because they were passed away. I know my dad's mother moved to northwest Indiana along with his brothers. Now, my dad had, I think, about 4 brothers. I think it's 4 brothers, and they all lived in northwest Indiana also. So that's where his mother went to with them 4. And 3 of the 4 were ministers, turned out to be ministers. And my dad was the only one that worked at the brickyard. One of the others tried working at the brickyard, and he worked for a week or 2, as my dad said, he threw his lunch bucket away and he said, "This ain't for me," and he left, went to Northwest Indiana, and I guess he went to a minister school or something in ministry, and anyway, he turned out to be a preacher along with three of the other kids, or two of the other kids. Three of them were ministers, which was amazing. But one of them went up there and did work at a brickyard, General Refractory, same as it was here, but in Northwest Indiana, and he was in management.
So your family was here, and your mother moved with some of your dad's brothers.
My dad's mother moved.
Or your dad's mother moved to Northwest Indiana.
With the other brothers, his brothers up in Northwest Indiana, and he's the only one that stayed here.
Okay.
And he was working at the brickyard at the time, and he wasn't about to move. He enjoyed it where he was at, and made a good choice.
Do you know about what year he started working at the brickyards?
He had, gee, I don't know, but I know he had like 20 years in when they shut down. And I'm not really sure what year, you know, what year they shut it down. But he had 20 years in at the brickyard.
Do you know about how when your dad was born? What year?
1913.
1913. And had he always worked at the brickyards, or did he do something before he worked at the brickyards?
No, he started out as a kid working at the brickyards.
Okay,
and he worked there for 20 years. And my mother, she just stayed home, kept house, raised kids, like most women did. But we also had a small farm that we raised crops on, and mostly to eat, but there were times they'd venture out into, we had an acre of strawberries, we had acres of cucumbers, we had acre of tobacco, anything to supplement the income. When you're raising 5 kids back in, we didn't buy a lot. We raised our own hogs for beef, for pork, and beef we didn't have. We more or less just eat what we raised, and they'd go to the store once a month or so and get what necessary things they had to have: salt, meal, flour, things like that. But we always managed to have good meals. At the school, when we leave to go to school, we always had packed lunches to take with us.
Your mom put up a lot of the food, canned?
She canned everything that could be imaginable to can. Everybody pitched in. Back then, everybody worked. With the kids, myself, brothers, we all picked berries, and she would make the jelly, can them, and we hunted, we fished, anytime we would back then hunting was a big thing. Rabbits, squirrels, everybody did it. Now it's cruel, they say, but back then it was a way of life. And my mother would take them squirrels and can them. Mm-hmm. And we would eat them during the winter when there was no hunting season in. We couldn't go out and kill fresh beef, so she would open them up. And same way with the pork, when we raised our own hogs, and they always managed to kill them around after they say the first frost, and usually in November. Then they would put them in what they called the smokehouse and salt them down to where nothing could harm it, and then all winter long they would eat out of that. And then if they seen, for some unknown reason, if it'd warm up or something, then they had to can it, put it away so it wouldn't spoil. There was the drawbacks on all of that. We had a cellar, we kept our potatoes and things in, and I don't know, it just seemed like a good life. I can't remember ever regretting it. I didn't grow up in a city somewhere. It was fun.
Did your mom sew any, or did she sew clothes or make quilts or anything like that?
My mother was known up until the day she died as the quilting lady. She
Really?
quilted from day one, and she sewed all of her clothes. We had milk cows, and that we got our milk from, and we would buy the feed for that cattle, and for feed for the hogs, and feed bags were printed back then, and the women would make dresses out of them. So when they went to the store, they weren't as interested in what was ground up in that bag as they were the color that it was in. It was interesting, but yes, she made a lot of her own clothes, and we threw nothing away. I think I wore clothes handed down from all of the other kids above me, and
Did she sew by hand, or did she have a machine?
She had both. She had a sewing machine, but she did a lot of it. All the quilting was by hand. No machine was on that quilt. And all winter long we would live in that small house with that quilting rack set right in the center of the floor. And
was it one of those that you could put up to the ceiling, or did it stand up?
It just stand up. It was about chair level where she could sit in a chair and work quilt that thing. She would piece it together in whatever pattern she was making, and then they'd put the quilt rack up, and then they'd start sewing them together, and she'd do that whole quilt. And after I had left and went to Indiana, when I got out of high school, I seen right away there was no work for me other than sawmill, and I sure didn't want that. So I left and went to Indiana and joined up with one of my other brothers that was up there, the older brother. And
What year was that?
that was in 57. 57, yeah. I went up there and went to work and at industrial painting, I think, was the first job I got. We were in the steel mills painting smokestacks, whatever, 100 foot off the ground.
Wow.
And I painted 7 mile of fence around city service refineries up there. We just did all kinds of jobs, all the factories we went in. I worked for a company called B. Blackie Peterson, and the pay was good. The job was filthy dirty. You come in painted every day. They couldn't see what color you was. And it was a dirty job, but the money was good. And I made a lot of good friends there, people that could help. And eventually I went to work into a factory where they made tank cars for the railroad.
And this was in northern Indiana, like around...
That's around Valparaiso, Indiana is where when I met my wife, we moved to Valparaiso and had a house built there. And I worked in East Chicago, Indiana. That was about a 30-mile one-way trip from where we lived to where I worked, and I drove that every day for 33 years. And I had a good job there. It was hard work, but it was a living. I raised a family, and thankful for them. And after I retired and moved away, they closed it down and moved it to Texas, I think. So I just got in at the right time and got out at the right time, and they moved the plane away to another place for cheaper labor, I guess, or whatever the reason may be. But
were there unions in the plant where you worked, or was it unionized?
yes, the union. We had a Boilermakers Union, which is a well-known union, and they treated everybody right, and the companies got along with them. And they was a time or two we would go out on strike for a particular thing we wanted to get into there, but never for long. They could come to terms on it pretty quick.
Now, was there union in the brickyards in Haldeman when your dad worked there?
They started a union, yes. He probably had 10 years or so in. before they started a union into that. And that got tough at times. They were people killed. They were people shot. It got tough. You got to know back then, people were, I don't know, I'd say less educated, and they protect what they had or what they thought. If they thought they was right, they'd die over it. And that's the way my dad was. I think he probably never went to school more than 1 or 2 years, but he was good at reading and writing and what he needed to do. I didn't know my mother went to school as much as she did until we were looking through some old pictures at the Haldeman reunion, and there was her picture in about the 8th grade, I think it was. I didn't know she even went to school. So that's something they just never talked about. But yeah, they got a union in eventually, but there's people living here in Morehead today, like Clyde Thomas. One of his relatives was killed. Somebody got aggravated with what he was doing. He was on the opposite side of the union. And
they were resisting the union coming in?
And they didn't like what he was doing, so somebody shot him, and everybody knows that lives in the area who did it. But there was never nothing come out of it, or nobody was never jailed, or that's just the way it was. That's just the way it was. I mean, it's a sad situation.
So the people in management, like some of whom were shot, those were mostly local people. Was this when it was under the General Refractories, or was this when it was under
General
Haldeman?
Refractories, yes. My dad was, I'm not exaggerating, but he was the type of person. He worked he was a gunsmith also alone. He had that training that he would be a gunsmith, so he took in people's guns and he'd fix them and so have it. But he was also, I guess you'd say, an alcoholic, and they drink a lot, and all of his friends drink a lot. And this was aggravating to my mother, but they was never went to blows. There was never harsh words said in front of any of us. They were just the nicest people we ever met. But I know my dad would sit in the chair in the living room and shoot the doorknobs off of the door going to the outside. Back then they had the porcelain doorknobs, and that just, he would just sit there and shoot the doorknobs off, and
while he was drinking.
Yeah, just have something to do, you know. It was just, my mom would just say, "Oh well, he'll put it back on in the morning." it was, I don't know. It was just the way they was raised up back then, and all of us kids from the time we was big enough to walk until we left home, but always taught gun safety, and we always had guns everywhere we went. We fished, we hunt, everything, but we didn't have problems with like they have today, you know, with the assault rifles and all of that. We just had the gun that we needed to do the job that we wanted to do. If we went hunting, rabbit hunting, or squirrel hunting, or whatever, we had the proper gun for that. That's all. We didn't have abundance of them.
Well, was there much crime back then? I mean, outside of this disputes over labor in the union, was there much crime in Haldeman then?
No. I could never remember any incident where anybody stole anything or robbed anybody. All the time that from the time I was born to the time I left that place, the doors were never locked in my house at night. The bicycles and everything we owned was laying out in the yard beside of the road. Nobody never touched anything. The only crime that I can ever remember that happened was somebody robbed a post office, and they knew who it was, so they just went to the house and got him and took him and put him in jail. kept him so long, let him out, and every incident that happened after that, they'd go get this guy. They knew he was the problem guy, and this is the truth. They would just go get him and take him, put him in jail. He'd own up to it, and they'd keep him a while. He lived most of his life in that jail here in Moorhead. But when he robbed the post office, he got into a federal offense. But some way or another, they had mercy on him because he didn't hurt anything. He didn't hurt nobody. He'd break into it at night and just go through the mail, and there was no money in there to be had. So actually, I don't know why anybody would want in there, but when I grew up, the post office was connected to the office buildings for the brickyard, and that's where the mail came in. And they also had later in years when I was in grade school, they had ice cream, like a parlor inside, but you couldn't eat it inside. You had to go in and get it. And outside they had a nice pavilion, the brickyard on, for their tennis players and everything, and for people on the outside. It was a beautiful place, and it was right on the main highway, the 174 highway, and you can stop there. People would stop there and wait for the Greyhound bus to come through, or they would just go to the post office and stop there to rest. Or it was just a beautiful area to sit, and we would go get the mail and get our ice cream and go out and sit out and watch the tennis players or what have you. And across the railroad, which was directly in front of the pavilion, there was 2 or 3 houses up there, and they played music, string music. Every day, I can't remember a day that I walked up through there that somebody was not sitting on that porch playing music. And at night, they would all get together, and a full band, and they'd play music, and everybody in the area would go up there to this pavilion, and they had sidewalks and places to sit and listen to them play music. And they were 300 yards up on the hill above them playing music. And
do you know their names?
Yeah, they're Wilsons. Some of them are still alive today, and all of them played music yet. It was just, none of them was ever sent to music school. They just picked it up on their own, and they had a wonderful band, and they just enjoyed playing music. And
did anybody dance when they'd gather at night?
On the streets, yeah. It was just a fun thing, and of course, probably people playing, there was probably a lot of alcohol involved in it too, like they do when they get together. But